Hello and welcome to another editing lecture for the Sheffield MA film students. I'm Noel Curry, and today we're going to be talking a bit more about the nuts and bolts of editing. I'm going to go through my process of setting up an edit, how I organise my footage, and what the process of going through various assemblies and edits whilst working with the director towards your final project. Then I'll do a little bit about using editing software. Unfortunately, the only thing I've got access to at the minute is a slightly old version of Adobe Premiere, so I'm going to keep it fairly basic and just go through, putting shots together, adding a few effects, restructuring stuff, but it's going to have to be quite rudimentary. If you're using different software, there are probably other tutorials on YouTube that you can have a look at as well to get more into the actual specifics of the bit of software you're using for your project. Anyway, I hope this is of some use. Let's get started. Okay, I'm just going to start off by talking a little bit about planning your edit and the general kind of workflow that I'm used to using when I'm editing a project. First up, before you start editing anything, you need to understand what you're aiming for. Who is your audience? Why are they watching this? How much time have you got to edit it? How much footage has been shot, and how long is the final piece supposed to be? So you really need to be clear about what kind of project it is you're aiming for. For example, when I'm working on some of the short films I've done for the One Show, these are like short 4-minute films, kind of soft news pieces, so factual stuff. Some of them are kind of interview based, so obviously the important thing there is to get the best out of the interviews and use the rest of the footage to kind of support what's been said in the interviews. Or sometimes they're actuality based, so we're following somebody doing something, so it's about identifying what the key points of that are, making sure the coverage of those moments is good. If you're working on a fiction piece, I would say your priority is recording the performance of your actors and making sure that's as good as it can be, and then everything else should be supporting that, depending on what type of film it is. Obviously, different films have different approaches, but these are just some of the things you can think about when approaching your project with regards to how you're going to edit it. So with logging, to give you an idea of how to approach the edit suite, I'll quickly run through what I hope to do when editing a program. Ideally, I would first have a chance to view the rushes, break them down into various bins, and make a log of what I have, making notes to remind yourself of what you first liked about it. Some editors, like the editor Masahiro Hirakubu, says he likes to watch all the rushes twice before he makes his first edit. With the first viewing, he'll maybe make no or just a few notes, just to give himself a feel of how he actually reacted first to what he was viewing, and then second time he'll start to make more detailed notes before he even starts the edit. Now, we don't all have the luxury of spending the time to do that, but if you do, it's not a bad idea to be really thorough in your approach before you start editing. Sometimes it's tempting when you're excited about a project just to jump in and start doing a little bit of editing, but I'd really recommend against that, because you can get yourself in a real mess later on in the project. A lot of this logging and transcribing and labeling can be very time consuming and tedious, but it will save you time later. It is the foundation of any good edit. As you can see, I've displayed a few sample logging sheets, give you an idea of what you can make notes of. You can do this on a pen and paper, but with most modern software it is possible to do it on the computer as well. Projects I'm working on, usually the interviews are logged for me, but I'm guessing you won't be able to afford to do that, so it is a good idea just to get it down on paper. It makes searching for various bits later a lot easier. You can also label shots, and because it's all on computers, you can duplicate the rushes quite easily, so it's easy to make sub clips if you want to make bins that have various types of shots in them. You might have bins for cutaways, or bins for street shots, or bins for interior shots. Depending on what the project is, you can separate the footage up how you like. Again, I'll show you how to make the various bins in a bit. So when you're ready to start, you'll do what's generally referred to as the assembly. Usually when I do my first assembly, I'm working from what's called a paper edit. That's when the director actually goes through all the rushes, and they'll make a list of the shots they want and what order they want them in order to just give us a very basic structure. Occasionally I get to sit down with the director and we'll piece together an assembly ourselves from the rushes. Often visually this cut is a mess. We're generally just looking for content and structure. Who says what and when. So it's just kind of the order of the information and how it comes to the audience. When I'm working from a paper edit, I make this edit as close as you can to the original script or outline. So it's basically just seeing what works, seeing where the problems are. This will be a long, slow version, and don't worry about that. May not make any sense visually, like I said, but don't worry about that. It's really just to give you a basic idea of the order of the material, if there's any major problems with it, and then once you get into the first cut, you'll start to see where the work is. So the kind of first working cut is something I'll work on getting it down to length. It's usually still quite long, but kind of more of a usable length. Then I'll be left to picture it up using kind of cutaways and establishing shots and whatever I feel works best. That's when we start to work on it if there's any major problems or issues with the edit. Still very rough and ready. Leave all the finessing for later. It's very, very easy to get distracted by this. There might be one or two shots that you feel aren't quite right together. It's very easily to disappear down a rabbit hole where you're tweaking it ever so slightly in order to get these two or three shots to work, and then you have another viewing and you decide you don't need that bit of the film at all anyway, and you just wasted a few hours getting it perfect. You really don't need to do that at this stage. It's again broad strokes about getting the overall shape of the program and identifying if there's any major problems that you have to work on and spend time on. At this point, once I've got a cut that me and the director are happy with, that's when we start to get feedback. So we might have a producer or an executive producer even, although they may be watching it later. Usually we show it to the producer first. We'll get some notes and we'll get a feel of whether the whole thing is working or not. Often at times it's easy to convince yourself that everything's tickety-boo, and then you show it to somebody else outside and they start to point out all the major problems with it that might have gone under the radar because you've been too kind of entrenched in the rushes. If there are major changes to be made at this stage, it'll be because the emphasis is wrong, concentrating on the wrong points. Maybe there's a problem with the structures. You need to play with the order of how things are revealed. Just maybe some things that aren't clear, that we've assumed too much knowledge of the audience, so we need to add in more footage in order to better explain what's happening. Or there just maybe bits that are boring or confusing, so we have to either clarify them or get rid of them altogether. So with fine cutting, that's the point at which basically you've had all the feedback from various producers, you've got it to a stage where they're happy with it, and now it's basically dotting the I's and crossing the T's. This is when you really can make all those little edits work, make sure it's working well with the music. Also you can start to do things like the audio mix, make sure all your levels are kind of a similar volume. You can do a bit of grading in order to make the picture have a unified look. Again, I'll show you how to do some of these things when we get into the nuts and bolts of the editing software. So this is when you do all the real kind of precise work, getting it just so that everybody's happy with it. So that's a very rough outline of how to approach an edit. Now I'll show you a few of the kind of technical aspects of using what's going to be Adobe Premiere software. This is going to be really basic stuff, so if you feel like you know your software already, you can probably just skip to the end where I'll have a couple of final thoughts and tips for you. Okay, I am going to show you the real basics of video editing on Adobe Premiere. As you can see, I've already created a project, created a couple of bins, but I'm going to create a few more to show you how that works. Like I say, this is Adobe Premiere. Methods are going to vary slightly between software programs, but the basics of a lot of editing software is the same. So even if you're not using Adobe Premiere, a lot of this should be useful for you. Okay, to create a new bin, I just go to File, New, and you can create a bin here. I'm going to call this one Music. Also, you can just do right click and you can do a new bin there, and I'll call that one Voiceover. And then if I want to add some footage to the bin, I can double click on it and that opens there. And I go to File, I can import. So let's import some music to our music bin. Let's get to the right file. Music. So what shall we bring in today? Let's have a bit of air. Can't even watch the stars. Let's import that. And we've got our again, as with most bits of software, there are always two ways of doing things. So the other alternative is basically you can just drag and drop. So if I go back to where music is again, let's pick another one. It's a bit of, you can literally just drag your file in. And this works for video footage as well. Let me just show you that quickly. So I've already added quite a bit of rushes to this. And let's just add one other file. Go to where we are. What shall I add in? It's not got footage. Let me just. I've added that clip as well. So, like I say, I've created a few bins. I've labelled this one Cuts, so that's got my latest cut in it. I like to have a bin that's called Old Cuts so that I don't get confused about what the latest cut is. I only keep the latest cut in my Cuts bin. This is my Rushes folder, which is where all my raw footage is. I've gone for graphics, so if you've got stuff like titles or any kind of backgrounds that you might be using, you can put it in there. I've got a bin for music. Oftentimes you'll have voiceover on a project, so I like to keep that in a separate bin. But it's entirely up to you how you organize your project. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. A lot of the editing software is very flexible, so you can set it up how it suits you best. So the layout of the screen is up to you as well. Like I say, this area here is called the project bin, so that's got all your bins in it. There's different ways of viewing these as well. This icon clicked, and you open up a bin, you see kind of the frames of the shots. Whereas when you do it this way, it's just more the name of the clips. I actually tend to prefer it this way because if you've named your clips properly, you don't always need to see what the shot is. And the other method can slow down your software a bit, especially if you're on a kind of older computer. It can cause lag and stuff like that there. So this is generally how I like to organize it. And you have over here are two viewing screens. The one on the left here is kind of where you can view your raw footage. So if I click any clip, it'll load that into my viewing screen. And then when I edit them into my timeline, they'll appear on my kind of edit viewing screen on the right here. You can readjust how things get laid out. By the way, this down here is where the timeline, you'll see as we build up our timeline, that will build up, and you have other information here. One of the things I want to say about when you're if you've never used editing software before, it can all seem a bit overwhelming at first because you have all these different windows and you've got, you know, menus that seem to go on for days. But my advice to you would be to not let it overwhelm you. The basics of it are very straightforward. So once you know which bits you need to use, you can kind of ignore a lot of the other stuff because you're not probably going to get into it unless you're doing a very complicated edit. So it's about getting to grips with the basics of it and ignoring the rest. So let's get started with a little bit of basic editing. So I've made my sequence here, so I've called it basic edit, first edit. Like I say, if you want to make a new sequence, you just go to new and it's sequence, and that's how you make a new one. Again, you can do it just by right clicking as well, but I've already made one. So here you'll see we've got 3 layers of video and 5 of audio at the minute. You can add these quite easily. Again, just right click, you can add tracks or delete tracks as you see fit, but this will be fine for our purposes for now. So let's just get a little clip loaded in here. So if I click on this, this is just some footage of a festival I shot a couple of years ago to help out in the neighbourhood. So I'm just going to edit a couple of random shots together and we'll show you how to maneuver them around. So here's our first shot. I'll just mark an in point by pressing I for in. Play it along a little bit, stop it, and then select an out point by pressing O, amazingly enough. And we'll just put that at the very start of the timeline. So I'll drag the cursor to the start of the timeline and mark an in there. As you can see, we're editing the video track to the layer 1 of the video and the audio to layer 1 of the alter things. And again, we can either insert or overwrite it. I'll explain the difference between these two once we get a few shots in. So there's our first shot. It's in. As you can see, it now appears in our timeline window. So let's add another shot directly in after it. Marked it in there again. Let's just pick another thing at random. You've got another wobbly shot of people playing on stage. Again, I'm just going to insert that. And let's put a third shot. What shall we put in this time? We've got some creating going on with children. So there's our 3 shots in. We've now created a sequence. A wall. Marvellous, a mini masterpiece. So let's put in a 4th shot of something else. So let's pick a 4th shot of some little creativity. So now there are different ways of editing this into our sequence. For example, if I decided I didn't like this shot of creativity and I wanted to replace it, I would mark an in and an out at either end of it, and then just mark an in. With this little quick word about ins and outs, obviously when you mark an in and out, that determines the length of the edit of the shot you're going to put in. You can do it in the source material or on your timeline. Obviously you don't need to do it for both. If you have an in and out on your source material, then you just need an in or an out on your timeline, and that works as your kind of reference point for where the shot's going to be put in. So I just mark an in point. Now if I want to replace that, I'm going to select the overwrite button because it will overwrite what's there. So as you can see, that shot's just been replaced by our other shot. Alternatively, so let me just Apple Z to undo that. If I want to insert another shot in addition to our making here, I'll mark an in and an out on my source. And then here, I'll clear the in and out, and just marking it in there. And this time, I'll edit insert. And as you can see, it's inserted that shot in between these two other shots. So that makes the sequence a little bit longer because I'm adding to the sequence. But when I'm creating a sequence, I don't have to put every shot I want in the order I want. I can go back and forth and change shots and move them around. So that's the very much the real basics of just, you know, this is assembly editing. I'm basically just putting the shots together in the order I want them to be in. So when we get onto the first cut, basically now I can decide that maybe that shot's too long, so I'm going to mark an in there and mark an out at the end, and I'll do what's called an extract. So as you can see, that's shortened that shot and shortened the whole sequence. The alternative to doing an extract is just to say, well, if I don't want that shot, but I'm going to replace it with something else, I can do a lift. As you can see, that removes that bit of the shot, but it leaves a gap, so the overall length of the sequence hasn't changed. This can be useful sometimes if you've edited something to music and you don't want the shots to move around because you know that the later shots are timed with the music, stuff like that. But let's just do the extract again. If I decide that I want these shots to be earlier, I can select them, and then when I move them down, if I just do that, it's going to overwrite what I'm moving them to. If I want to kind of get the other stuff to move as I'm moving, when I'm moving them, I press, I think it's Control or Command. And as you can see, the shots have been moved down and the other stuff has been moved to the end. To accommodate that, that will be different for different software. I know on Avid you've got a selection tool that's either red or yellow. When it's yellow, the stuff moves around to accommodate it, and when it's red, it just overwrites it. So you'll get to know the ins and outs of whatever software you're using. I'd recommend whatever program it is you're working on, just have a look at the command palette and have a little play with what all the little different things can do. So that's a little bit of basics about moving shots around. Let's decide that when we're going from inside to outside, we want to have a little dissolve. So I can just select that cut. Oh, this is interesting. So because these, at the minute, these you'll notice when I select the video, the audio gets selected as well. That's because they're linked together at the minute. You can unlink them. If I just right click on it, click unlink, that means I can select either the video or the audio. Same with here, so let's unlink these two as well. So I can then select the cut. By the way, this is when I'm selecting things, I've got the selection tool highlighted. There's some other things you can do here. I'll go through these in a minute. But again, I'm not going to get into too much detail because your software may be different. But the basics of this still apply. So I can select and edit, right click and apply default transition, which is going to be, I believe, probably the default is usually a 1 second dissolve. You can change your defaults if you know your software well enough to do that. But once I've added one, little dissolve, I can then select that edit and go up to an effects control panel again. This will be slightly different than Avid, but the basics are the same. And I can change the length of it. So say I just want a 10 frame cut. You can see that makes it shorter. So also we might want to do what's called to split our audios. For example, we've got our music here. We think, oh, the music's nice. Let's hear that throughout the whole thing. So again, let's unlink them. And I can move the audio down to a different track. So it was on track 1, it's now on track 2. And on this one I can literally just grab it and stretch it out. So Now here, music from that shot, one of the previous shots, which ties it together nicely and kind of gives it a more unified feel. Obviously, you can still hear the audio from the other shot, so there's ways of reducing it in Premiere. I can just select it, do audio gain, and reduce it by, let's say, give it 12 dBs. Gives it a good chunk off. So the music's coming through a lot clearer on that now. But there's also a thing called rubber banding, which can be very useful. So if I say I want the music to be quiet at first, because maybe there's some voiceover there, but I want it to be louder later, you do what's called rubber banding. So you select your pen tool, and you can see there's a little line here that represents the audio. So I can put little key points in that, move it up and down. Let me just turn the audio of track 1 off for a bit so we can hear this better. So you can see it's quiet there, it's louder there. So you can mix your audio in order to make your project work better. Obviously, you might just want to add a different track of music altogether. So let's do that quickly. We go back to our music bin. Let's put a bit of Kelly Watch the Stars in. So I'm going to select a good start point. So I want this to be on a different track. So as you can see here, I've just got audio here. So on the left hand side, I've only got A1 available because that's all that's there. It's just audio. I don't want it going on track 1 or 2. Obviously, when you're working on a project, it's a good idea to kind of sort your audio tracks according to different types of audio that you have on them. So generally speaking, I've tracks 1 and 2 are sync sound for me. Tracks 3 and 4 might be kind of sound effects or more general sounds. 4 and 5 is often voiceover, and then sorry, not 4 and 5, 5 and 6 would be voiceover, and then 7 and 8 is often music. And these are often, it might be stereo tracks and mono tracks. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the nuts and bolts of it at the minute, so let's just put the music on track 5 for now. And so I'm going to deselect the other tracks, mark my in and my out. And then we want to overwrite that. So there we have our music on there. And let me just mute the other ones. Yeah, they are muted already. That must be a music on or sequence now. And so quickly, the last thing I'm going to show you quickly is grading. So this will show you the basics of effects, and there's lots of other effects you can add. So I'll go back to Select Tool. Let me just select this shot here. So I've got the effects bin down here. Go to Video Effects, Color Correction, and let's do the 3-way color corrector. This is something that you probably just do more as you're getting into the fine cut. So I've selected that clip, go up to Effects Control, and you can see I've got all sorts of controls here. When you're grading, if you know about color balance and color correction, when you're shooting outside, if you don't color balance correctly, your footage will end up looking a bit blue. You can fix that with color correcting tool. And if you're shooting inside and you don't color correct properly, your footage will end up looking a bit orange. And this is a way of correcting it. One of the things you want to do is, if there's something white on the screen, that's your real savior, because then you can select your eyedropper, click on the thing that's white, and it should automatically adjust for that. This shot's quite well color balanced at the minute anyway. Sometimes you want to change the color balance in order to give it a certain mood. So if I wanted this to look a bit more early in the morning, you might want to make it blue. So I can shift everything towards the blue end of the spectrum. Blue, yeah, that kind of effect. If I want to make things look warmer, people tend to look nicer when they're given a slightly warmer color grade. You can approach everything towards the kind of orange-red spectrum. You can see how that works. You've got what's called a split view here. So I don't know if you can see that, but the left-hand side is showing me what the shot looks like with the effect, and the right-hand side is showing me it without the effect. If I do something extreme, that might become clearer. Yes, you can see there that it's only affecting half the screen now, so it kind of shows you what you've done and gives you more control over what you're doing. So these input levels, you can make stuff brighter or darker depending on what you need to do. There's lots more tools here, but again, I'm not going to go through them all because it's going to be different for every system, but it's a very useful tool to get familiar with. And like I say, the basics of any effects work in this way in Adobe. Again, it's slightly different in Avid, but the basics are the same in that once you've got the effect on there, then you can adjust your effect for that shot. And you can then also save that effect and apply it to other shots. Again, I would recommend, if you're using different software, to look up different tutorials on Google and YouTube. They will steer you right. And I can't emphasize this enough, Google is your friend. There's no shame in looking stuff up. If you don't know how to do something, Google it. It's very good. There's lots of very good websites out there that will show you how to do the individual things that you need to do. Obviously, this lecture is very basic, and it's frustrating that I can't be there because each student will have their own little things that they need to know. So if you have any particular questions, please do get in touch with me through Susanna Gent, and I'll be glad to give individual feedback on any issues you're having with the editing software. But like I say, I Google stuff all the time. As a freelance, I'm shifting from system to system quite frequently, and I might be working on a bit of software that I haven't used for a year, and I just forget how to do stuff, or I'm doing something I haven't done before. I will Google it, and I will look it up and figure out how to do it from there. So I hope this has been of some assistance. Again, I know it's very rudimentary, but at least it's a start. And like I say, I will be available for feedback and instruction at the other end of my computer. So best of luck with your projects, and I look forward to seeing what you produce. Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye.